When Ben 10 first aired in 2005, pre-Omniverse, Alien Force and all that, we as an audience were given a series following our protagonist and Ben, along with his 10 alien forms, at least at first. Then we're introduced to a major element of the series that somewhat takes away from that 10 in the title, but makes the series infinitely more exciting in the additional aliens after those initial 10. Ben and subsequently we were no longer limited just to 10 aliens, and from that point it felt like Ben could unlock a never-ending stream of unique alien species. And as the series went on, the show delivered on that with absolute banger after banger alien transformation being unlocked one after another. Each one not only giving us interesting new species, but also doing some great world building, making the universe of the series feel unknowably expansive, making both the classic series itself and the Omnitrix so much more exciting. And all these new transformations were so much fun. I certainly have my favourites, but even my least favourite transformations were great additions to the Omnitrix classic playlist. At their very best, they elevate the series and serve to generate so much intrigue in the greater universe, and at their worst, they're still fun additions to the series. The original 10 all differentiate themselves from one another so nicely. Some fall into similar categories, sure, but they each bring their own unique something or other to the table. They'll have these distinct silhouettes and appearances, and their sort of set of situations that they particularly really thrive in. And somehow these additional classic series aliens feeling so unique from one another while still maintaining that grounded feeling the rest of the classic series aliens had. With the slight caveat that 3 of these new species come from the same area and have some thematic elements grouping them together, but we'll touch on those shortly. For now, the only tidbit I want to mention before we get into them proper is I've always felt like Ditto, Igai and Waybig have a certain something to them that makes me want to put them in their own category. I think it's the somewhat humanoid proportions, however exaggerated they may be, the way they each have the really distinct power sets. You could lump Upchuck in there a bit with that, but more so with the other 3, they feel so weird and out there in a way that sort of aesthetically groups them all together. I don't know if I'm alone in thinking that. If you do agree, please let me know. I'm not going to go about the rest of these in order as much as where I feel they best belong, but I think we'll bookend these with the first and last introduced, starting off with Cannonbolt, who served perfectly as our introduction to other species inside the Omnitrix. Thankfully, despite my initial viewing of the series being drastically out of order, I did manage to watch his introduction in The Big Tick before knowing about any of the other late additions to the classic series. His introduction set this standard for accessing new Omnitrix aliens, along with the major implication that there's a lot more to the device than we already know about at this stage. I haven't gone back and rewatched this one in a while, but after that enormous alien tick comes down to Earth and starts sucking all the nutrients out of the planet in a very proto-Galactus sort of fashion, none of Ben's aliens are able to take it down. Ben cycling through just about every transformation in this episode to no real success, before eventually trying out Cannonbolt after previously in the episode thinking he wasn't all that great, who came in pretty handy and throwing himself about and killing the tick, which always felt like a really great use of this roly-poly alien. I remember having a pretty lukewarm reception to Cannonbolt at the time for whatever reason, but I've really grown to love him over the years, especially his classic series appearance. That, and I liked watching Ben trying to work out his powers, trying to mimic Spider-Man's little hand motions to activate some kind of ability before realising he's just kind of a roly-poly guy. What really cemented Cannonbolt for me was his use against an amalgam Kevin at the end of Grudge Match. After Kevin gaining a pretty intimate understanding of all of Ben's aliens' abilities, Ben surprising and overwhelming Kevin with Cannonbolt was a real highlight of the series up until that point. Going on to other series, it was a really nice highlight to see his return in Alien Force, that whole I'm feeling nostalgic bit. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this style of content and aren't subscribed, please do so. Otherwise, great. Let's move on to our next pick. Moving on, we have Upchuck, who I find the need to mention again that I watched the series out of order back in the mid to late 2000s. My introduction to this species was not in his debut episode with Xylene. I didn't know the episode existed until years later. The first time I saw this transformation was in Ben 10 vs. Negative 10 Part 2, where I was under the assumption we were getting a brand new alien species in the final fight as some sort of huge moment to wrap up the special. I might have to go back and watch the episode The Visitor after this as a bit of a refresher to sort of work out how that would have affected my experience if I'd watched that one first. There's also another episode he's in between those, I'm sure. Either way, a really fun little transformation, really strong ability. I like the little pocket dimension bit. The energy projectiles are great, especially how they are more powerful the more he takes in. And I really like the classic series look and clothing for him. Him later being revealed to be a subspecies was a really fun addition. He also nicely really set himself apart from the classic series while still feeling grounded by being so out there, especially ability-wise. But again, I thought he was the last alien introduced before Waybig. Actually, jumping around a bit, I'm now realising I watched Tickets to the Omnitrix prior to Ben 10 vs. Negative 10, so Upchuck was in that film and I must have just not clocked him at the time. I'm not entirely sure what happened there. Which nicely brings us to our next alien, and one I was introduced to in the Secrets of the Omnitrix film, Igai. For those of you who may not be familiar, the film has a few versions, each with different aliens appearing in the action set piece at the beginning of the film. And with the copy I saw from Blockbuster in 2008, whatever it was, that was my introduction to iGuy. And in knowing how out of order I watched the series, he felt like just one of many new transformations Ben had access to that I just hadn't seen yet. And especially as a child of the late 90s, early 2000s, with a somewhat limited access to the internet, I didn't know how many new transformations there were. This was just another new one. And right from the get-go, he became an immediate favourite of mine. I love his proportions, his elemental powers, his particularly unique head design with those little bat ears. Still to this day, he's one of my favourite aliens, easily in my top 10, if not top 5. Actually, back to that feeling like he was an alien Ben's had experience with prior to the film. In his actual first appearance in Ben 10 vs. -10, he maintains that feeling, Ben using him for the first time so casually that you just assume he'd been iGuy before. I suppose you could logically assume he'd unlocked him off-screen, along with potential other aliens while playing around with the Omnitrix. Though in researching for this video, which again, I say almost every video, I found out that he was the first alien to be unlocked off-screen, with the others later being Arctiguana, Feedback, and Fast Track. That and the other thing I really feel like I need to mention in this video, his name is very particular, in a way that the series points out and makes fun of. It's a very literal name in line with Ben 23's naming convention, but I quite like it as matter of fact as it is. Sticking on theme a bit here with the more monstrous looking alien transformations, let's get into the 3 species that make up the Halloween or monster film trio. Starting off with another personal favourite of mine, again an easy top 5 with Blitzwolfer or at the time Ben Wolf. I've dedicated pretty much a whole video to it, so I won't cover it in too much length, but Ben unlocking this transformation was an episode in itself. It's not quite like the big tick leading up to Cannibal's first appearance. Just about the entire episode follows the transformation being unlocked, from a slightly non-conventional DNA acquisition sequence to a very gradual transformation sequence taking up what felt like the better part of the episode. This was an absolutely amazing way to bring a new species into the series, and I've got an entire video dedicated pretty much to that. Showing us as viewers this mysterious Navajo werewolf stand-in, only to have it seemingly curse Ben to have the rug pulled out from under us with the reveal that it's an alien werewolf. I just love this transformation, mostly in the classic series, but I do like Omniverse's take on it too, just not quite as much. The way the mouth splits apart for the sonic howl ability especially, the physicality of this transformation, the great action sequences with it. It's a real shame he's used in such a limited capacity with so few appearances in the classic series. We do get a fight between this and another species on this list, but we'll get to that one after we wrap up the horror trio. And speaking of wrapping things up, and I'm sorry to do that, it just happened when I was writing the script, let's talk about Snarrow, or as they were called in the classic series, Ben Mummy. We haven't got to the worst one yet, but I'm glad they adjusted the names. Wasn't an enormous fan of the Ben Blank names. Following the steps of Blitzwolfer, this transformation's introductory episode revolves around the mummy, before we get a more traditional DNA acquisition moment. Though we don't actually get the Snarrow transformation until later in the series. The episode the mummy was introduced in under wraps was always especially horrifying to me. The Cartoon Network body horror when the person was mutated by the Corodium, not the mummy as much. There's something so distinct to Snarrow, despite being one of the ones that slots in so nicely with the other 2 spooky transformations. I, again, love the physicality of this one. The proportions work so well. He towers over Ben and the others in a way that feels tall but not enormous, if that makes sense. Those long, slender elements really aiding in that. Any action sequences of this one are especially a fun watch, particularly in Omniverse. Moving on to our 3rd and final of the horror trio with Frankenstrike or Ben Victor, a name I take particular issue with. Is Frankenstein like the mummies and werewolves of our world inspired by these alien species, or did a Frankenstein's monster-looking species come to our world and take on the identity of Victor, presumably after Victor Frankenstein? Moving on from the name, great to see our first transformation sequence that wasn't Ben. And I really loved the 3 DNA sources working together under Zaskare as a team. Wasn't a huge fan of Ben's classic series look for Frankenstrike, but I absolutely adore the Omniverse look. It's absolutely perfect. Actually, I quite like Benzara's look too. I think the purple really lends itself to the design better than the green does. Moving on from these 3, but jumping back a bit in order, over one I've kind of skipped twice now, we've got what is possibly my least favourite on this list, while still being a fantastic transformation with Wildvine. A particularly horrific looking alien introduced in a particularly horrific episode. It didn't make it to the series, but something else I researched was the working name for this transformation in line with iGuy was Plant Guy. One of the elements I love about this design is just how different he is from Ben's other aliens, especially with the way he moves about. Him tunneling through the ground to get the jump on the werewolf was always a standout, along with how he swung about in a sort of Spider-Man way. I don't recall the exact details, but it felt very intentional that he's the Plant Guy alien introduced in an episode all about fungi aliens. I'm not sure the exact connection there, but if you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Feels very much like somehow they had some trace amount of Wildvine species DNA that the Omnitrix scanned, though it could just be a thematic coincidence and entirely unrelated. Otherwise, I really like the episode of Omniverse where Ben becomes a gym bro while remaining as Wildvine. Before we get to our last pick, let's go over an absolute favourite of mine for no real reason beyond pure charm. Ditto was undoubtedly one of my favourite additions to the classic series. I love everything about this transformation. The ability to multiply, the way they're all linked to one another, the very Animaniacs feeling to this form, largely due to the voice acting on Rob Paulson's part. His introduction being tied up in the Dr. Animo subplot about wanting to use this species' DNA to create an army of self-duplicating alien-animal hybrids was a lot of fun. Otherwise, I really enjoyed his appearance towards the end of the wrestling episode. I think he manages to be more charming than effective in a really endearing sort of way. It's a small detail, but the way his body is divided up into these sort of distinct zones with a sort of minimalist approach to his proportions really lends itself to that cartoony feel that I love, along with those really sort of disproportionately large hands that don't really give him any advantage other than just being more expressive. And if you haven't gone back in a while and rewatched Divided We Stand, I highly recommend it. Moving on to our final transformation and circling back to the Secrets of the Omnitrix film, we've got Waybig, who along with nicely wrapping up this list and concluding the film, represents a sort of escalation in the series. In Ben's expanding roster of aliens, Ben has a lot more ways to problem solve or get his way out or through any given situation. And Waybig is just a very solid answer to most any situation that Ben may have to be the biggest, strongest guy to get through. He functionally eclipsed the biggest bad in the series, throwing him into outer space, ending the film's major conflict without exerting himself all that much. It's all well and good to say how big Waybig is, but in his introduction especially, and credit to the filmmakers, he really did feel enormous, and through that he felt unstoppable. And from there went on to be a great staple of the series, certainly losing some of that gravitas, but staying a great transformation. Wrapping things up, with the introduction of these transformations came the perfect setup for later series, or more so a way to make sure the show never gets stale. This new batch of Omnitrix aliens made the show all the more exciting before having a bit of a break, making room for the Alien Force playlist. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much. If you're not subscribed, please do so. But either way, I appreciate you sticking around. Thanks for watching.